creatine wrecks your kidneys.
Creatine.
But there are now 2 decades of research in healthy adults that say up to 10 grams a day has no adverse kidney effects.
New attention on creatine, the supplement bodybuilders made famous is now all the rage after a new article in the Wall Street Journal says it could be key for improving your health and longevity.
Creatine is not a stimulant like caffeine at all. Your body naturally makes about 1 gram of creatine per day in your liver, your kidneys, and your pancreas.
So it's a naturally occurring compound. It's made up of 3 different amino acids. Our body actually makes about 1 gram of it per day from our livers, our kidneys, our pancreas.
Creatine helps to protect your mitochondria, and it actually helps with antioxidant action. Stabilizing your cell membranes is one of the most important things you can do if you want to live a very long time. Some people get really upset when I mention that I have increased my IQ by up to 20 points. Increasing short-term memory and working memory reliably increases IQ by 12 and sometimes more points. Creatine increased short-term memory tasks by 20%. Now, when it comes to creatine, how much should you take and when should you take it?
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.
You may think creatine is just for bodybuilders, but imagine that same molecule helping your brain power through those late afternoon meetings, maybe making your memory work better before that big presentation, or stabilizing your mood on a stressful date or a stressful day, or even making your bones work better and making your heart work better. That's how important creatine is, and it's because it affects mitochondria in your cells and a few other things. And this matters right now in the world of biohacking and longevity in a major way, actually even in the world of consciousness. Nearly 1 in 3 adults report brain fog or just being really tired at least once a week. And that's a 2022 study. The problem is that's reported. And what I know about humans is that we're the same as the sheep on my farm. Sheep, if one of them is sick, it'll hide inside the herd. It will not show that it's sick because it doesn't want to get kicked out. Humans are the same way. So we're not going to report weakness unless it's really bad. So my data says that 48% of people under age 40 have early onset mitochondrial dysfunction, and everyone over age 40 has that. In other words, even if you're not reporting brain fog, you probably have some, and maybe you haven't noticed yet. But creatine helps in a major way. And creatine is not a stimulant like caffeine at all. Bodybuilders have used it for a very long time because it helps you to get water into muscle, which makes them look bigger, and it increases muscle power. And what we know now is that creatine works inside your cells' mitochondria, inside the phosphocreatine system, and it helps the cells do a better job of regenerating ATP. And, well, you know, if you've read any of my books, especially my brain book called Headstrong, or my longevity book, Superhuman, or the newest one, Heavily Meditated, about mitochondria and consciousness, these guys are major players, and their job, among other things, is to make ATP. More ATP, more consciousness. More ATP, more anything your willpower is trying to do. And here's what's interesting. Clinical trials show that 1 week of creatine loading at a pretty high dose, 20 grams a day, can improve short-term memory tasks by 10 to 20%. Now, some people get really upset when I mention that I have increased my IQ by up to 20 points. Why up to? Because IQ is not constant. IQ is, to a certain extent, dependent on your toxin exposure. Increased toxins, you lower IQ. Yes, lead will do that very reliably and probably permanently. But if you don't believe me, take an IQ test when you're hungover. There you go. The other thing, though, is that increasing short-term memory and working memory reliably increases IQ by 12 and sometimes more points just from that. And what do you know? Creatine increased short-term memory tasks by 20%. That's cool. So my goal for you today is to talk about the history of creatine, and it's probably not what you think it is, and some of the myths. I'm going to share with you 5 key ways that creatine fuels your mind and your body. It's not just mitochondrial. It's how your body makes creatine. It does. And it turns out men make more than women. And how it uses creatine. We'll talk about brains, heart, bones, and the other things it does. When you should take it, how much you should take, and things to make it absorb better, including things I've never heard on any other podcast. Real-world biohacks and use cases, what to stack it with, what it synergizes with, how to get good creatine. It turns out it's not that hard. I'll talk about safety, side effects, including some that I've experienced personally that are pretty unusual, and precautions. And I'll give you a quick 5-step, here's how to get started with creatine. All right, the history of creatine. 1832, a French chemist, I won't try to say his name because, well, all the French people will be very angry at me and they'll throw croissants at me. See what I did there? Anyway, his name was Michel, I can say that. He first isolated creatine from meat, which is its natural source. Notice it's not a vegetable. And he named it for flesh, which is great. And then, only almost 90 years later, Otto Meyerhoff and A.V. Hill discovered that creatine provides a rapid energy source in muscles, 1924. And then you fast forward another 70 years, and athletes started using it. This is in the 90s. It was all over the place. I was, I think, in high school in the very early 90s, and it was something everyone was just taking creatine. So we're on our second big creatine wave right now. And studies at the time showed that it increased muscle phosphocreatine by up to 40% in a few days. So it had its moment of fame, and then it just became like an old bodybuilding supplement. Why? Because of some myths. Well, someone came out, probably a medical doctor with big pharma backing, but I don't have any facts about that. And likely because creatinine in kidneys, which is not creatine, can be confused, but they started saying this myth, creatine wrecks your kidneys. But there are now 2 decades of research in healthy adults that say up to 10 grams a day has no adverse kidney effects. And we've known that since 2000 when that got published, but it takes a while for new knowledge to enter back into our consciousness. And myth number 2 says you'll get bloated and gain fat from creatine, which is funny if you understand mitochondria and fat. This is because initial weight gain does happen, but it's water pulled into muscle cells, not fat. And that actually helps downstream muscle growth. Oh, and hydration is good for you. And myth number 3 is it's only for men. I guess because women are worried about getting bulky. Well, it also just so happens to make you very healthy. Women will experience similar strength gains, cognitive benefits, and cell hydration to men, and perhaps even better because women don't make as much in their body, so maybe they need more. Your body naturally makes about 1 gram of creatine per day in your liver, your kidneys, and your pancreas. That is if you're getting enough amino acids like arginine, glycine, and methionine. Oh, if you're vegan, you're not getting those amino acids the way you need them, so you're screwed and you need even more. Sorry, I was a vegan too. Here's why you're not getting enough creatine in your diet unless you're carnivore or carnivore-ish and you eat a meat-centric diet the way I do. If you eat an 18-ounce steak, that's not a bone-in steak, just an 18-ounce steak, you're going to get between 3 and 5 grams of creatine. So 1.5 pounds of beef every day. Yikes, that's going to get you where you need to go. I actually do eat that much beef on some days, and I don't regret it, but I also take creatine. If you eat herring or salmon, it's also in there, but at slightly less amounts. There's also a study from 2003, back when veganism still had some credibility. Well, it shows that vegetarians, and in particular vegans, start with much lower creatine stores. So when they supplement, they get even larger relative benefits. This means that if you are vegetarian, and you can be a healthy vegetarian, I have tons of friends from India who do that, it's very hard, if not impossible, to be a healthy vegan. And I say that with love, having been a devout vegan. I don't want you or your children to be unhealthy because you believe a nutritional myth. So anyway, you're going to get more benefits. If you live in India, you probably need creatine, just straight up. Here are the 5 main ways that creatine provides energy for your mind, for your body, for everything you do. The first mechanism is the phosphagen system. You can imagine ATP as a battery with a charge. And after you use the charge, it goes from ATP, which has 3 phosphates, back down to ADP, which means it has 2 phosphates. And so it's a battery, takes an electron, moves it around, gets another electron, moves it around. And PCR, which is a phosphocreatine, is a backup battery that you can tap into when you run out of ATP. That means you can sprint harder or you can lift extra reps. This is interesting because taking about 5 grams a day of creatine raises muscle phosphocreatine stores by up to 40% in 5 days, which can increase your sprint power by 15%. And we've known this since 2007. It's just not something that most people think about because lifting, if you're not in the gym, maybe you don't care, but mental lift is what you do as a CEO or just as a human being working on having better willpower or learning how to meditate or something like that. So think of it as an extra battery pack that you bolt on the back of your phone or that sticks on with a magnet. There, now it lasts longer. It turns out it isn't just muscles because there's a neuronal phosphagen system, and this is the second mechanism. Because brain cells use creatine kinase to maintain ATP, they do this during bursts of mental activity. So you want to focus on that final exam, focus on the meeting. Well, you want to have a backup battery at the same time. And it's a meaningful cognitive boost, and for this, you might want a bigger dose. There's a study of 20 grams a day of creatine as a loading phase for 5 days. It improved working memory and intelligence test scores by 10 to 20% in young adults. If someone says you can't raise your IQ, you can say, well, Dave just talked about a study that said intelligence test scores went up with something as simple as creatine. It's not that hard. And maybe add some electrolyte, and God knows what you might do. You might pass your exam, right? Again, young adults, most of them are healthy, at least they were when this study was done. There's more health problems in young adults now, then you need it even more. 20 grams a day for 5 days while you're studying before finals and during finals. And not only will your brain work better, you might grow abs. Wouldn't that be terrible? And if that's not enough, maybe you're anxious, depressed, angry, or distracted, or whatever the heck else is going on with your brain, supplementing 5 grams a day of creatine alongside antidepressants for 8 weeks increased treatment response rates by 30% compared to just taking the medication. You could also, if you're not on medication, you could look at taking saffron, which has an effect as strong or stronger than SSRIs in some people, but not all, and stack it with creatine. And then maybe you don't need the antidepressants that the doctor wanted to give you before they tested something as easy as creatine. See how important this stuff is? The third reason that creatine works is around cellular hydration and anabolic signaling. And these are, I put them together, but they're a little bit separate. Well, creatine draws water into your cells. That increases your cell volume by about 5%. You want that because now your cells are hydrated. At Upgrade Labs, we measure thousands of people's cell hydration with medical grade technology when they come in the door. And a lot of people, probably about half, I would guess, show signs of cellular dehydration even if they're drinking water. Well, creatine can help to solve that problem. And increased cell volume sends a growth signal that activates mTOR. And mTOR is the thing that regulates protein synthesis and muscle repair. So if you want to repair your muscles or just grow them, you might want to have enough water in the cells. Now, some people say, but I want my mTOR to be low. No, you don't. You want occasionally to have low mTOR and occasionally have high mTOR, but limiting mTOR by dehydrating your cells is a terrible trade-off. You don't want to do that. If you want to drop your mTOR, eat no carbs and then maybe limit protein, but really not eating carbs is the big thing, or just fast. And there's something else that happens, and it's beyond just muscle. Hydrated cells resist heat and chemical stress better. And osteoblasts also respond to volume changes, which means you could get better bone density. And it doesn't come as a surprise. If you want to measure how healthy someone's metabolism is, and you can look at their bone density, it's a very good indicator that your mitochondria are working. Dense bones, highly functional mitochondria. So if you can make highly functional mitochondria, will it increase bone density? Likely, but your bones are still going to need some stimulation. I don't think it's going to fix an astronaut with no bone flexion. The fourth reason that you should start taking creatine is that it helps to protect your mitochondria, and it actually helps with antioxidant action, which is not what people know creatine for, but it's an important effect. Stabilizing your cell membranes is one of the most important things you can do if you want to live a very long time or just have more energy. And creatine inside mitochondria help to move ADP and to maintain membrane potential when you're stressed, and that prevents energy collapse. Energy collapse feels like bonking or a brownout or just like crashing. And some of that can be a blood sugar crash or a blood pressure crash, but there's also a mitochondrial crash where you just can't make any more energy. And that's something you can fix with creatine. Creatine also directly neutralizes free radicals inside the mitochondria, which reduces oxidative damage to mitochondrial DNA. And in models of stroke and Parkinson's, it's extra effective. So if you don't want to get Parkinson's, maybe having some creatine is a really good idea. I would consider anything that increases mitochondrial performance or mitophagy is going to be, over a long period of time, reducing your risks of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, senile cognitive dementia, and a whole host of other things that make you old and tired. But wait, there's more. The fifth reason that creatine should be on your short list of things you take, aside from the fact that it's really cheap, is that it helps with gene expression and long-term adaptation to stress. What this really means is that if you take creatine on a regular basis, it will upregulate something called IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor, which is responsible for putting on muscles, and it increases mTOR, which increases muscle fiber size. And there's a study from 2008 that says this happens just over the course of weeks, so you don't have to be on it for a long period of time. And this is perhaps the most important reason that I take creatine, and it is around neuroplasticity. My New York Times best-selling brain book is all about two things for your brain: increase mitochondrial function and increase neuroplasticity. You do those two things, everything in your life gets better. Your brain works better. Your meditation works better. Your sleep works better. It's the biggest thing you can do. You have to have more power and more plasticity. So what does creatine do for you? Well, we already know it gives you more power in the brain, but creatine directly raises BDNF expression, at least in animal models, and that means it facilitates new neural connections and learning. Since it works in animals and it works via mechanisms you understand, I'm pretty sure it's going to do that in my brain and yours. There are two little-known ways to increase creatine absorption when you take it. One of them is that you want to take a little bit of sugar or any kind of sweet carbohydrate with your creatine, because your muscles like glucose, and that will change the uptake of creatine. So if you're going to put fruit in your shake, that's when you put the creatine in. The other thing that no one talks about to get creatine into your cells more quickly and more effectively is don't suspend powder in a drink. Take the creatine and put it in hot but not boiling water. Creatine's stable up to about 60 centigrade or 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's warmer than you want to really put your hand in. So hot water will dissolve the creatine into suspension. And if the water's a little bit too hot, just drink it quickly, but you don't want to boil creatine because it starts to break down if you're at full boiling temperature. If you were to put it in your coffee's about 175 degrees after it's just out of the pot. So drink it really fast or cool the coffee a little bit, and you can do it that way. So suspending it does one thing. Dissolving it into solution with heat does another thing, and it's worth doing that if you really want your levels to go up more. You can even take less creatine that way because it absorbs better. Here's how important having some carbs could be with your creatine. Having 20 grams of dextrose, again, that's kind of a big dose, and dextrose is the same as glucose and doesn't have any fructose in it. So this is something that's going to spike your insulin. Well, if you take it with creatine, it doubles muscle absorption via insulin-mediated pathways. So do you want to go and just punch yourself in the pancreas with a ton of sugar? No. But if you're going to have some carbs, have it with the creatine, and you get extra benefits from it. Now, when it comes to creatine, how much should you take and when should you take it? Studies show you don't really need a loading phase because it'll load over time anyway, but you probably do want it if you're tired, if you're jet lagged, you have a final exam coming up. So the typical protocol for loading creatine is 20 grams a day. You do 5 grams 4 times, and you do this for 5 days, and that's just going to fill you up quickly. Maintenance, 3 to 5 grams a day to keep your levels topped off. And you could just do 3 to 5 grams a day for a month, and that'll get you there anyway, and it's less work to think about it. You can have more. Some people are experimenting with 10 or 20 grams a day. And if you have more, post-workout with carbs, at times of stress, take it with protein. And I recommend taking it more loaded towards the morning, especially if you have a hard time with sleep. And we'll get into that in a minute. Now, most studies use creatine monohydrate. This is by far the most common, but you can get creatine HCl. Creatine HCl is more soluble and people report fewer GI issues, but people don't have a lot of GI issues with creatine monohydrate if they put it in hot water. It's the low solubility, so little basically grains of creatine that were suspended in that water, they can irritate the gut. But if you dissolved it into the water instead of suspending it in water, you're unlikely to have those problems. So you can take A little bit less creatine HCl, I don't bother. Just take monohydrate, heat it up, you'll be fine. Here are some special use cases where you really want to pay attention to more creatine. One of them, if you are vegetarian or vegan, as I mentioned earlier, your lower baseline creatine levels mean that you're going to see really big cognitive gains. This is massively important if you're vegetarian. If you're an older adult, you need at least 3 grams a day, and I would honestly recommend 3 to 10 grams a day because you need to preserve lean mass, your strength, and your memory. And there's a study that says just 3 grams a day over 12 months did preserve lean mass, strength, and memory. So if 3 grams works, going a little bit heavier on the dosing is a really good idea. And if you have any neurological condition, early trials in Parkinson's, ALS, and basically brain injury hitting your head, slower progression and reduced fatigue from creatine. If you're in sports like MMA or hockey or football or soccer, be on creatine before you go out and do your sport in case you hit your head. You'll really be happy with the outcome. I would recommend this during pregnancy and nursing. And there's emerging research that it's safe to reduce maternal fatigue and support fetal brain energy. There are pilot studies for this. Given that a woman's body makes creatine and it's present in the diet, and eating more red meat during pregnancy is good for babies anyway, the preponderance of evidence in my world says it's a good idea to do 3 to 5 grams a day because you can get these nutritionally anyway. It's unlikely to be harmful because if it was, eating steak would be harmful, but your mileage may vary. Here's some real-world use cases for biohacking with creatine. High-intensity interval training. Do 5 grams pre and post. And there's a study showing 10 to 15% greater sprint power and less muscle soreness afterwards. You're welcome. If you're a student or a cognitive loaded professional, 5 grams in the morning plus a cup of Danger coffee with 100 milligrams of caffeine equals a 15% faster problem solving and sustained alertness. And that study was creatine plus caffeine. I just get my caffeine through Danger coffee because who knows what you might do. Shift workers, you want 5 grams at the start of your shift so you have better reaction times and you have better mood, especially in the middle of the night in the emergency room. And the crazy drunk person comes in, you're less likely to get pissed off, and that's precious. If you travel all the time like I do, 5 grams a day on days you travel, you're going to have less jet lag, faster circadian reset, and 40% fewer sleep disturbances in a pilot study. If you have social anxiety, number one, read heavily meditated, for God's sake. There's no reason to have social anxiety. It's all hackable. But if you do, 5 grams before an event equals a 30% drop in self-reported nervousness. That's a big deal. Maybe you're feeling nervous because your brain is overloaded. Add more power to the brain with creatine. Less overload, less anxiety, and then you can be the life of the party and not even be stressed about it. And if you're hungover, well, learn how to not be hungover when you drink. I've done lots of podcasts on that. Look at episode 1000 for more information about that. A company called ZBiotic, and there's many other things to do. Number one, don't drink. But if you are hungover, 5 grams the morning after you drink equals a 50% reduction in headache and brain fog, according to user surveys. There's a lot of reasons you might want to just take it every day and not worry about special use cases. What should you stack with creatine to get the most results? Well, you should stack carbs and protein. There is a study that shows 20 grams of dextrose and a tiny dose of protein, just 10 grams of whey. Well, that creates an insulin spike because whey is insulinogenic and so is dextrose, and that drove creatine uptake. I would probably say less sugar and more whey, or half whey and half beef or something, but whatever. Drive insulin up a little bit and you'll get more benefits from your creatine. You don't want to drive insulin up a lot because that makes you old, but if you just lifted, you want to drive insulin up because it'll cause you to grow muscles. You can also take creatine with beta-alanine. 3 grams of beta-alanine with creatine enhances muscle buffering, and that extends your high-intensity capacity. You're a competitive athlete, you can do this. And you might want to take a source of nitrate. Improved blood flow plus creatine equals greater muscle perfusion and power output. My favorite way to do this is N101, which is really powerful, or the supplement Vasconox. Also can be really, really helpful. Vasconox has a longer 24-hour half-life. N101 creates a quick spike. And there's evidence that taking caffeine, or in my case, Danger coffee, with creatine will increase mental speed. And don't do it with energy drinks because they have way too much caffeine to be beneficial. So what creatine should you take? Number one, any creatine will work. Plain old boring creatine monohydrate does work. There can be quality control or contamination issues. A lot of companies add weird flavorings, fillers, flow agents, and stuff like that, so watch out for those. The gold standard for creatine monohydrate is CreaPure, micronized creatine monohydrate. And that has the most studies behind it. But like I said, any monohydrate will work. And if it says enhanced absorption and it doesn't have really good clinicals, it's probably a bunch of BS, but it could be real. After creatine monohydrate, you can find creatine HCl. Again, if you're going to do that, look for a high-quality manufacturer. It's hard to know who's good. I don't have a good brand to recommend for you there. The new kid on the block in the world of creatine is GAA creatine, or creatinine, as they like to call it, if I'm even saying that right. The GAA form of creatine is creatine, or creatine. I have no idea how to say it. It's creatine. And this is new. I've used it, and it's a blend of GAA, an unusual form of acid, with creatine monohydrate, and it comes out of Australia. We know this works because, well, like all great performance enhancers, they started using it in livestock, and it was so powerful that now we're using it in humans. And it looks like it works because GAA is a direct creatine precursor. Think of this like taking niacinamide and NR and NMN all at the same time because they're precursors of each other, which come before NAD. So that's what GAA is doing in the world of creatine. And here's the evidence that you can have 30 to 70% greater muscle creatine uptake versus just regular creatine monohydrate. So if you want to take less of it, GAA creatine is probably better, and I like to do that. Now, a word of warning. You can run out of methyl donors. If you have MTHFR, or you just know you have methylation issues, higher doses of creatine could make you run out of it. So you could take TMG with your creatine to be extra careful about that. That works for most people. Or folinic acid is something that creatine is specifically likely to deplete. So I found that if I don't take folinic acid with creatine over time, I get muscle tension and I can't really sleep. More than a few people have reported sleep issues. And the big issue is when your ATP is so full, your sleep drive it just goes down. So you wake up at 4:30, like, I'm ready to go. And you are. In fact, I woke up at 4:30 this morning because I didn't take my TMG with my creatine. And you know what? I'm so good. It's the end of the day. So this is awesome. But if you find that you're just not getting enough sleep because you reduced your sleep drive, try folinic, try TMG, and try taking your creatine in the morning, and the problem should go away. Another thing that I almost don't want to say, if you take creatine that puts water into your cells and you don't have any water with it, well, you're doing it wrong. So drink extra water, but drinking water is dumb if it doesn't have electrolytes in it. So at least put some sea salt in your water or some electrolytes that contain magnesium, sodium, and potassium, and you're going to be much better off. Now, this isn't available yet, but it deserves mentioning because delivery mechanisms are so important for supplements. There's a company working on intranasal creatine that could have really cool cognitive effects. So as soon as that's on the market, you can count on me to stuff it up my nose and tell you what it's like. Okay, here's a recap of this entire episode. Number one, creatine is a universal energy buffer. It works for muscle, it works for brain, it works for heart, it works for bone, and for your immune system. Start with about 5 grams a day, and you can load if you want to because it accelerates benefits, but you don't have to. If you take it with carbs and protein, you're going to benefit more. If you have problems with GI issues, dissolve it in hot water or split the doses. You can stack it with beta-alanine, N101, omega-3s, and some amount of caffeine, and you'll get additional benefits. You want to choose a good form of creatine. Creatine monohydrate is beneficial. CreaPure monohydrate is the most studied, and creatine, the GAA form of creatine, is the most absorbable. So there you have it. Creatine is one of the safest, most versatile, and most science-backed biohacks you can take. It's been a part of human performance since the beginning of the biohacking movement and a part of the longevity movement since before that. And creatine is enjoying its second big moment in the spotlight, and it's deserving to stay there. Because if you spend a bunch of money on longevity supplements and on mental performance and physical performance, creatine for men and women is a non-negotiable thing. Just understand the ins and outs from this episode so you get all the resilience, all the presence, all the power that is yours for the taking. If you like today's episode, let me know. I would love to record some more of these. I love teaching. I taught for 5 years at the University of California. I taught nerds how to build the internet. And I would love to teach you how to build resilience, presence, inner peace, an extreme amount of longevity, and all the other things you want in your life. So that's what I'm here to do. If you like this, you want more solo episodes, let me know by sharing this or by liking it. I read the comments.
See you next time on the Human Upgrade Podcast.